The fiery, allegedly fiery, quick-boiling temper in a young and middle Verdi is of course extremely present. Wagner is teasing us more. It all takes longer with Wagner till they finally get to the point. Sometimes we are doing too much Wagner and then we need a bit more Verdi. I'm here, breathing in as much air as I want to, but I've got nothing to admire but my cows, oxen and horses. I'm being the farmer, mason, carpenter, servant if necessary. Adieu books, adieu music. I feel I have forgotten the scores and do not know them anymore.
Verdi writes this in 1880 to impresario Aravabena as a farmer from Roncola. That's how Verdi wanted to be seen. Or was he actually more a farmer than a cosmopolitan? Verdi's cosmos is the Emilia-Romagna, with its landscapes, the people and cuisine. Being an agrarian entrepreneur, he is one of the most important employers in the region of Don Camillo and Papona. A rich landlord in the province, a celebrated composer, capturing Europe's opera houses with his works.
I think nature was very important to Verdi. We can hear a lot of nature in his music. And also the characters that are talking, the spoken parts in his operas, are people from the province.
A journey to Verdi is best started at his country property in St. Agata. Verdi buys this luxurious villa with a park and fields at the age of 34. It is a star's property, whose operas made him rich at a very early age. He uses his life savings for this large property close to his birthplace, a luxurious idyll in an agricultural region. This place becomes his artistic hideaway, his refuge. He feels the hype surrounding him is getting too much. His friends don't understand, but Verdi loves his solitude.
What harm is done when I live in seclusion? When I decide not to visit the aristocrats? When I don't join the parties and festivities of others? When I manage my manner because I enjoy it?
Is Verdi fleeing from society? His wild marriage with the singer Giuseppina Strepponi, mother of 3 illegitimate children, causes commotion in the province. Content for an opera. In La Traviata, Violetta, a courtesan, falls in love with Alfredo, a man from the province. Instead of attending parties in Paris, they find happiness in the solitude of nature. But this big love becomes a victim of society.
Often these are people like you and me. The story of La Traviata is contemporary with some modifications, and also Rigoletto could play in modern times. Let's not talk about Troubadour, because no one really understands what it is about. But still, even that is current, since life is so colourful.
Verdi experiences the hypocrisy that he criticizes in the Traviata himself. He lives together with Giuseppina secluded in the Palazzo Orlandi in the little town of Busseto. But Verdi is too popular to be private, and the public condemns his relationship with Giuseppina, who has an ambiguous reputation. He flees with her from the bourgeoisie and they go to the country. Corrado Mingardi, director of the library in Busseto, has been a regional Verdi expert for 43 years.
It was a huge scandal when Verdi brought Giuseppina to Busseto to live with him. She had the reputation to be a lost woman, a Traviata. One has to consider this was in 1849, in the middle of the 19th century. It didn't befit to bring an unmarried woman to Busseto to live with him.
When composing La Traviata, Verdi is suffering strokes of fate. He loses his first wife in 1840 at the age of 27. His son and daughter had died the years before. The composer carries sadness and melancholia throughout his life. This can be seen in his music. The dark and tragic is dominant in his operas. The father-child relationship, which is the center of La Traviata, as well as in Don Carlos and Rigoletto, are painfully deep.
Singers can't cry because they can't sing while crying. The orchestra cries for them. The audience sees those tears. The tears aren't actually there, but we see, hear what the orchestra does. This touches directly, in a naive way. Same thing with the wind in Rigoletto. Who makes the wind? The storm comes in the last act and boom, the orchestra becomes nature.
It might have been the meager landscape of the Emilia-Romagna which shaped Verdi's character. He's a person who avoids the crowds. However, he's been admired by the people from an early stage for writing revolutionary music, though he was actually never part of a revolution. His opera Nabucco, which he writes at the age of 28, makes him famous right away. Verdi becomes the symbolic figure of the desire for freedom from the Austrian occupiers. Even today, he is still considered a composer for the Risorgimento, the unity movement in Italy.
The libretti in Verdi's operas are about the big issues, like humanity, ethics, and political conflicts. This is why his work often got censored, and he was told to soften his words. Un ballo di maschera, for example, was a pain for the political regime at the time. It is very emotional because you stand for something. You have your own compositions and aspects of the libretto. This is a strong force supporting his magnificent music. This makes him a central figure of the international melodrama.
But first and foremost, he becomes a composer people want to listen to. Every year, crowds of tourists make pilgrimages to the church where Verdi was baptized in 1813. The organist Andrea Mora plays on the same instrument that Verdi played on when he was 9 years old. At the top of the fans' wish list is Va Pensiero. This is why Mora transliterated it for the organ. Whether Verdi intended to give the people a voice with his choir of prisoners or not, the piece is a hit, and Italy's secret anthem even today.
He was a composer who lived a very intense life, and so his music was intense. Sooner or later it gets through to people. They understood that his music not only represented him as a composer, but also as a person in some ways. In his region, he was not only admired as a musician, but also as a person.
In Emilia, Verdi is admired like a saint. Alfredo Gatti has been taking care of Verdi's shrine in the church of Roncolet for the last 40 years, although the composer struggled with the church's claim to power.
Verdi was an altar boy as a child. He served at that altar out there. One Sunday, Verdi was listening to the organ and became lost in the music. The pastor called him, and since little Verdi did not answer, the pastor slapped him, to which Verdi responded, "May lightning strike you." A year later, the pastor died in the church during a thunderstorm. He was struck by lightning. I think Verdi was possibly agnostic. We can hear this in his music. Though religion matters and is part of many operas. And there is Verdi's masterpiece, Requiem. Everybody familiar with the Requiem knows that it is almost like an opera, meaning it is too close to the world. It is the path between heaven and earth, but it stays on earth.
Verdi writes only a few religious pieces. The Vatican does not recognize his Requiem as a religious piece for a long time.
Music itself is not religious. It is used for religious purposes. There are certain tone combinations that remind us of religious phrases. Nevertheless, a series of chords in itself is not necessarily religious. Think, for example, of Quattro by Verdi and imagine an alternative text. You would feel it to be solemn, but I could imagine different lyrics there. It does not have to be Ave Maria.
Verdi's real passion is to be found in the dramatic pieces. This is where his musical genius shows. He wrote 31 operas, mostly to finance his property in the country. There, he successfully creates theatrical plays that celebrate the people and the nation with powerful choirs and popular melodies. It doesn't take long before Verdi is able to ask for high payments.
Ever since Nabucco, I had as many contracts as I wanted. During the second performance, while the ballet was on, Morelli came to my cloakroom with an already signed contract. I only had to fill in the fee I wanted. The opera was I Lombardi.
For the composition of Aida, Verdi demanded 150,000 gold francs, about 750,000 euros today, and got them. The wage of a superstar. Verdi's music is not just emotion.
It's more than that. It goes to the heart first and then directly under the skin. This is due to the magnificence of his music, the strength in orchestration and his talent to write for the voice, but also because of the rhythmical elements.
There are only a few picturesque towns in the Emilia-Romagna, and the landscape is not exceptionally beautiful. Verdi hides his private life from the public. On his property, he dedicates himself to the simple things in life. He works as an eco-farmer, raising his own cows, horses and chickens. He harvests vegetables and wine, which he drinks daily, and builds a creamery, an irrigation plant and a cold storage house. Working there, he's just as much himself as in the big opera houses. It almost seems like he's become obsessed with country life.
Dear Arriva Bene, Maestro Verdi is in a well in Sant'Agata. The aforementioned Signore had the idea to get a steam engine built to pump water from a small brook which runs by his house. The maestro stays down there all day long, partly to encourage the workers, to challenge them, and mostly to give instructions.
In 1844, after Verdi has composed 15 operas in only 10 years, including Rigoletto and La Traviata, he concentrates mainly on the work in the country. Only 3 orders from abroad bring him back to the composing because of the generous fees which help him to build some more in Sant'Agata. One of them is Aida. His 2 last masterpieces are made with leisure, when Verdi is already 80 years old: Othello and Falstaff.
One loves especially the melodic aspects. I love Verdi's melodies very much, and I am always thrilled by his great harmonics, especially in his later work, La Forza del Destino. Of course, Othello, Falstaff, Aida, and Don Carlos. These operas are a harmonic universe and indispensable. The great composers can be recognized by 2 harmonies, just 2 chords, and you can tell if it is Wagner, Verdi, or Debussy. This rule is only true for the really great geniuses in classical music.
Verdi captures the mood of the people. He describes the dramatic situation of his country. You can see it daily. The patriarch who meets with aristocrats but does not forget his peasant heritage.
You know, I am building. Last year I built a dairy farm, this year a bigger one, and there are about 200 workers who I had to brief on future projects. It is meaningless work for me, since I will only gain a tiny profit. But at least people find work and don't leave from my hometown.
Verdi's agricultural business employs workers from the whole region. You can still meet people who have a personal relationship to the composer. Massimo Spigaroli is one of them. His great-grandfather was one of Verdi's employees who had rented some land and made ham for the maestro, who loved it.
Verdi traveled the whole world and brought back everything he liked. The French cuisine, a lot of recipes that were adapted to our region. Every time he drank wine, he would plant its vine on our land. And he did the same with fruit trees, and actually with everything. All this still makes our cuisine today. Verdi tried to make all kinds of things, like cheese, and he made the pasta secca, the dried pasta, popular. With Culatello, he puts this region on the table.
Verdi loves simple, fresh cooking, made with regional products. He's famous for his risotto Milanese. Most of the time, he has someone else cooking. Since he was a child, Stefano Bonini the owner of a shop with sausage and cheese specialities, has heard stories about Verdi's love of food.
Questo è prosciutto crudo di Parma.
The maestro would cut this prosciutto di Parma into large slices and roast it with butter.
In padella col burro. Sempre una mia zia mi ha raccontato che una sua amica era
One of my aunts was a cook at his place,
cuoca nella cucina di Giuseppe Verdi e raccontava che era
and
un
she
grande
told us
amante
that
della
he
terra,
loved the land, meat, good wine, and desserts.
goloso di dolci. Mi ricordo un budino fatto col burro,
I remember a pudding made with butter,
un dolce freddo
a cold
estivo,
summer dessert.
dei gnocchi di
Gnocchi
pasta con
made with
sughi e
dough,
funghi,
with mushroom sugo, and tortelloni with ricotta and wild herbs.
la cacciagione,
Sergio falso! Oh, che vi piglia! Hai battuto i miei servi! Oste, un'altra bottiglia di Cheres! Hai fiaccata la mia giumenta baia, sforzata la mia casa! Non la tua massaia!
In his last opera, Verdi lets the big knight and vagrant bon vivant Sir John Falstaff enjoy the earthly pleasures. A funny opera which Verdi wrote for himself and for fun. The Spigaroli family remembers that Verdi would sometimes lose his sense of humor, though, with his staff, and get rather grumpy.
Verdi was a harsh person feared by the people. Maybe it was his nature, but he also needed to stay in charge of his property. He owned 1,000 hectares of land and employed about 400 people, amongst them my family. When Verdi was traveling, he demanded daily reports from his administrator about everything going on with the property. He wanted to know how many workers went where, if the fields were tilled. He wanted to know everything that was going on. To be in charge of all that required strictness.
Verdi is business-minded, which makes him financially independent. With self-confidence, he also dictates his wishes in the opera house and expects obedience from others, although obedience was not his thing. He wrote to the director of the Opéra Comique in Paris.
Furthermore, it is desired that the artists don't sing their version but mine, and that the orchestra shows its goodwill, and that, all in all, it is my will that dominates. This might sound tyrannic to you, and it may well be, but if the opera is to be of one piece, the idea is consistent.
Verdi was a musical genius, an eccentric, and a financial ace. He had enough money to be socially active. He built a hospital and a home for old musicians called Casa Verdi in Milan. When asked which piece he would consider his most beautiful, he would answer, "The Old People's Home in Milan. The house is my most beautiful legacy." In his testament, he made sure that the profits from his operas would go to this home for old artists in need. There is space for 100 artists. Lina Vasta, a former sopranist who still gives singing lessons, is one of them.
My relationship to Verdi is very special. I talk to him daily. When I get up in the morning and come down here, Giuseppe Verdi is the first thing I think about. He was not only a great musician, but also a great man who thought about the ones in need, who were less fortunate. something not everyone thinks about. We were lucky that he created this place for us. I think of him and his music every day, about what he has created, his music. It is wonderful music, and it will live forever.
Lara Didier Gambardella is one of the most famous inhabitants of Casa Verdi. She used to sing at the most famous opera houses together with Pavarotti and Morella Freni. Some of her recordings are still legendary. She started her career at the age of 19 with Verdi's Il Trovatore and also ended her career with the same opera. Ever since, she's been living in Casa Verdi.
Questa è la Vagabonda di un'opera di Chailly, maestro Chailly. La mamma che è qui. Che per fortuna c'era Verdi, se no non cantava.
Fortunately for me, Verdi existed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have become a singer. He was a composer who understood singers, and he composed especially for the voice. His music was written for singers. It's music that does not harm your voice, and it's easy to sing.
On January 27, 1901, Giuseppe Verdi dies at the age of 87. He wants to be buried in the old artist's home. He lies here next to his wife, surrounded by music.
He was a star, adored by the people, like a grandfather, Verdi for all. People followed him and were proud that Verdi was from their country. And I think Verdi was very close to his fellow citizens. The dialogue between him and the people was important for Verdi. It shows in his music.